The M14 highway no longer looked like a road, it looked like the entrance to hell, Kyiv. Stretching hundreds of kilometers from Russia to Crimea, this critical supply artery became a giant burning kill zone where AI-powered Ukrainian FPV drone swarms hunted Russian convoys day and night with machine-speed precision. Fuel trucks exploded into fireballs visible from satellites. Entire armored columns vanished beneath waves of autonomous drone strikes guided by thermal tracking algorithms operating faster than human reaction. Then came the terrifying escalation. Hypersonic Oreshnik missiles, 9-0, cruise, missile bombardments over Kyiv, nuclear panic across NATO, and Russian revenge rhetoric spreading across 150 million people. For the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis, the fear of nuclear war no longer feels theoretical, it feels one miscalculation away from becoming reality. The M14 highway no longer looked like a supply route. It looked like a machine designed to grind armies into ash. Stretching from Russia through the southern occupied territories all the way to Crimea, the M14 served as the critical bloodstream of Moscow's entire southern campaign. Without it, supplying Crimea and sustaining the front became nearly impossible. For Ukraine, destroying this artery wasn't just tactical, it was a direct strike against Russia's most vulnerable lifeline. By spring 2026, Ukrainian forces had turned the M14 into a killing corridor using a terrifying new doctrine: AI-powered drone warfare. FPV swarms equipped with thermal cameras and autonomous tracking systems hunted Russian convoys through the darkness. Drones didn't just fly, they stalked. AI algorithms locked onto heat signatures, followed vehicles for miles, and struck with cold precision. Russian fuel trucks and armored columns became prey, lit up like glowing targets in the black Ukrainian night. The results were apocalyptic. Burning fuel trucks lit up the horizon for kilometers. Entire armored columns erupted in chain explosions, sending fireballs hundreds of meters into the sky. Flames were so intense they were visible from satellites, while thick columns of black smoke choked the highway for days. The southern corridor became less a highway and more a glowing ribbon of destruction stretching across the night. Then came the Snizhne raid. Ukraine shifted from hunting hardware to hunting the nervous system itself. Elite Russian drone operators and their command teams. Kyiv was no longer merely destroying drones. It was hunting the people who controlled them. Russia suddenly realized its most advanced drone warfare capability was under existential threat. But the explosions on the M14 were only the beginning of something far darker. And this may be the terrifying future of warfare itself. Because battles are no longer decided only by tanks or artillery. Increasingly, wars are being fought by algorithms, drone swarms, satellite intelligence, and machine-speed targeting systems operating faster than human reaction. So tell me, do you think the age of traditional battlefield warfare is already beginning to disappear? This algorithmic evolution has fundamentally rewritten the rules of engagement. On the modern battlefield, human intuition is being replaced by machine learning models that process data at trillions of operations per second. It is a ghost war, fought in the invisible electromagnetic spectrum where cyber warfare and physical destruction merge. Silicon Valley technology has met the brutal attrition of Eastern European trenches, creating a hybrid monster of automated violence. As autonomous systems take the wheel, the traditional chain of command begins to fracture. Generals no longer map out movements days in advance. Instead, they oversee neural networks that redirect drone swarms in real time based on shifting satellite telemetry. The human element is increasingly relegated to a mere rubber stamp, approving kill lists compiled by cold, unfeeling code. This shift creates a terrifying paradox. As weapons become more precise, the potential for catastrophic miscalculation grows exponentially. A single software glitch, an overlooked false positive in an AI's targeting matrix, could mistake a civilian evacuation for a military convoy, triggering an uncontrollable cascade of geopolitical retaliation. The threshold for total war has never been lower, and the guardrails have never been more fragile. But the destruction on the southern front soon evolved into something even more dangerous: psychological warfare fueled by revenge. When the explosions reached Starobilsk, the battlefield stopped being merely military. It became psychological. In the dead of night, a series of powerful blasts lit up the sky over the Russian border town. Shock waves ripped through the air, shattering windows for blocks around. Flames engulfed several command facilities as secondary explosions sent pillars of black smoke twisting into the darkness. The most critical target was the Rubicon Drone Center, the secret brain of Russia's UAV operations. Precision strikes devastated its communication hubs and control systems. Ukraine later claimed the heart of Russia's drone command architecture had been crippled. What followed was not simply a military setback, it was a psychological rupture. Russian state media immediately reframed the attack as a reverse Bucha, a deliberate massacre of civilians and a war crime orchestrated on Russian soil. Graphic images and emotional testimonies flooded television screens and social media. The narrative was clear. Ukraine had crossed a sacred line. This was no longer a distant conflict. It was an assault on the Russian people themselves. Whether the accusations were true or exaggerated no longer mattered politically. What mattered was that millions of Russians suddenly believed revenge had become morally necessary. In the days that followed, Russian society began to emotionally harden. Calls for retaliation grew louder, more visceral. Talk shows, telegram channels, and street conversations shifted from strategic analysis to raw demands for blood. 150 million people were being psychologically prepared for escalation. The Kremlin now faced a new kind of pressure, not only from battlefield realities, but from the mass emotional expectations of its own population. A dangerous genie had been let out of the bottle. And then the Kremlin answered with something far closer to apocalypse. The night sky over Kyiv stopped looking like weather. It started looking like the end of the world. Hundreds of Shahed drones filled the darkness like a swarm of angry hornets. 90 cruise missiles screamed in behind them. Air raid sirens howled across the capital. The sky erupted in streaks of fire as Ukrainian anti-aircraft systems desperately fired back. Shockwaves from intercepted missiles rattled buildings. Explosions bloomed across the city. Entire neighborhoods lit up in orange flames. The air itself seemed to burn. Western air defense systems were overwhelmed. Interceptors ran out, radars saturated, cooling systems overheated and failed. For the first time in months, Kyiv no longer felt protected, it felt exposed. In the chaos, one of the strikes hit the Chernobyl Museum. History itself was set ablaze, a symbolic wound that cut deeper than any military target. The past was burning while the present bled. Then came Oreshnik. It arrived like a weapon from myth. Hypersonic speed tore through the atmosphere, glowing white-hot from friction. A blinding flash, a deafening roar, a kinetic shockwave that shattered concrete and glass for hundreds of meters. The ground trembled as if the earth itself feared what was coming. Oreshnik arrived not simply as a missile but as a message. Even without a nuclear warhead, the world instantly understood the signal. This was a demonstration of the next level. The world was suddenly forced to imagine what the next launch might carry. In that moment, Kyiv was not just under attack. It was a warning to every capital on Earth. Could this spiral become nuclear? The question no longer felt theoretical. It felt terrifyingly close. And perhaps that is why spring 2026 feels so terrifying. Because this no longer feels like a war constrained by traditional escalation logic. It feels like both sides are increasingly willing to push further, strike deeper, and gamble more recklessly than ever before. And if you're still watching this story, it's probably because the fear of a much larger catastrophe no longer feels impossible. But if Moscow expected fear to force Ukraine into submission, the next morning proved otherwise. When the sun rose over the ruins of Kyiv, Ukraine answered with fire. While the capital still smoldered, Ukrainian forces launched a rapid series of retaliatory strikes. Storm Shadow missiles slammed into Russian airfields at Taganrog and Voronezh. Several Su-34 fighter bombers were destroyed on the ground in brilliant orange fireballs. Deep inside Russian territory, Ukrainian drones and long-range weapons hit critical targets with precision. These were not random attacks. They were deliberate messages. Ukraine was proving that Russia could not escalate without consequences. Every blow delivered carried the same cold logic. Pain would be returned. The most dramatic scenes came from two ops. Massive oil refineries erupted in towering flames. Thick columns of toxic black smoke rose high into the sky, visible for dozens of kilometers. The strategic chaos spread quickly, disrupted fuel supplies, panicked evacuations, and economic shockwaves rippling through southern Russia. The war had entered a phase where neither side appeared willing to absorb pain without immediately returning it. Deep strikes were no longer rare or shocking. They had become normalized. Long-range attacks into each other's territory were turning into routine escalation, a dangerous new rhythm of the conflict. And that retaliation spiral may now be pulling the world toward its most dangerous moment in generations. For the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis, the language of nuclear fear no longer felt theoretical. As Kyiv burned, Western embassies issued urgent evacuation warnings. Diplomats rushed to airports, carrying only essential documents. Families were flown out under the cover of night. The images of empty embassy compounds sent a chilling message across the globe. Even the diplomats were no longer safe. In Washington, panic was rising. President Zelensky made urgent calls, requesting more Patriot systems, additional interceptors, and immediate emergency military support. The tone had shifted from strategic partnership to desperate survival. Meanwhile, inside Russia, hardliners grew louder. Influential voices in the military and nationalist circles openly demanded a tactical nuclear strike to end the game once and for all. The danger was no longer only what Putin wanted to do. It was also what increasingly radical voices inside Russia were demanding he do. Financial markets swung wildly. Militaries across NATO raised alert levels. Governments held emergency meetings behind closed doors. The entire world was watching the escalation spiral with held breath. And somewhere inside that spiral of retaliation, the modern world may be discovering how fragile its own red lines truly are. Spring 2026 may ultimately be remembered not as the moment peace collapsed, but as the moment restraint itself disappeared. The images return with haunting symmetry: burning highways stretching across southern Ukraine, endless drone swarms darkening the sky, raging fires consuming Kyiv's neighborhoods, and streaks of missiles cutting through the night like deadly comets. In just weeks, the conflict had spiraled through a merciless escalation chain. The M14 slaughter that triggered raw revenge psychology, the night Russia demanded blood at Starobilsk, the apocalypse over Kyiv, the terrifying arrival of Oreshnik, the symmetrical retaliation strikes, and the rising nuclear anxiety gripping the world. This war was no longer driven solely by territorial ambition. It had become a contest of psychological escalation, revenge, symbolic destruction, and fear dominance. The most terrifying part of spring 2026 may not be how much destruction occurred, but how quickly the psychological barriers preventing even greater destruction began collapsing. Humanity now watches two nuclear-era powers testing how far escalation can go before something irreversible happens. And perhaps that is why the world feels so unstable tonight. If you want more deep geopolitical documentaries that go beyond headlines and uncover the systems, psychology, and strategic transformations reshaping modern warfare, stay with the channel. Because the next phase of this conflict may not be decided only by military victories. It may be decided by how long the modern world can survive the collapse of its own red lines. And somewhere between the burning highways of southern Ukraine and the glowing missile trails above Kyiv, humanity may already be standing closer to the edge than it dares admit.